Hello, today I'm going to show you a brand new feature in Qimage Ultimate, and it is so fantastic it falls in the same region as the DFS Deep Focus Sharpening did, a breakthrough in sharpening which allows you to sharpen your images with no halos and no worries. Well, this falls in that same category of innovation. I'm going to click on this button here, which opens the Refine screen in Qimage Ultimate, and it looks at your raw images, and as you can see, Qimage did an adequate job averaging out the very light parts with the very dark parts and the medium parts, and comes up with a reasonable image for you to look at. It doesn't know what you were shooting for, but here's the image. Go at it, make it better if you have the tools, and you certainly do. Okay, well, just backing up a little bit for those of you that might not remember that well, if we picked a grid, we have 9 choices, and we clicked on the blue button, for example. This being predominantly dark with the leaves makes the compensation so that Qimage makes the image lighter. Okay, and as you can see here, we got some blown out areas with 255s in them. And I'm not a fan of blown out whites, to be honest with you. But just again, to show you how Qimage works, this area here is even darker than this one was. This one has some white, so you can see what Qimage did to compensate. And the one on the bottom is all grass, and you can see what's going to happen here. We have the same thing. We got the blown out whites, see? So that's not thrilling me. Now, I could go to the center and use that grid, and let's see what we get. Okay, well, there's a lot of white boats and this white thing that's all in the center. See, that's the important part. That's the thing Qimage is working with, just the center that you picked. So, of course, I could add some fill light to it and lighten it up, but fill light has a certain property which says, okay, I'll make it lighter and lighter for you, but I'm not going to increase contrast because otherwise I'll get more blown out whites. So it has a tendency to soften the contrast part of the image if you give it a lot of fill light. Okay, so we're going to take that off, put it back. But look what we have now to work with. Here you had a choice of 9 grids, and now you have a choice of making your own. How's that sound? I'm taking my mouse and I'm drawing a box just like this. I can stop anywhere I want. It's not important. Not, critical is what I want to say. And I make this my grid. This is my new grid box. That's all. Now look what I got. I got no blown out whites. Okay. Just the way I like it. It's sharp because I didn't need a lot of fill light. I've got accurate words, I can read, everything is nice. I made a very, very large improvement to this image. Okay, I'm going to save this. We'll move on to the next image, okay? There we go. All right, hang on there. Okay, now we're going to look at this image right here, and we're going to click on that same button, that Refine button again, and we're going to have a look at this one. Well, this is kind of an interesting image. As you can see, again, the principle. Qimage spotted this hot spot right here, which is nothing more than an early morning dawn with the sun trying to poke through a layer of clouds to get the day started. And consequently, the rest of the image went darker to compensate for this extra bright spot over here. Well, if you want it that way, that's fine. All you got to do is click here and use the red grid, which will lock that so it doesn't blow out any more than it might be. But we're interested in something else. I see something in the sky that's very interesting. Okay? So what am I going to do? I'm going to draw that box. I already showed you that stuff. Okay? I'm going to draw that box, and we're going to hit the blue button, and let's see what we get. Okay? Whoa, that's pretty neat. I think that's pretty neat. Okay, now, here's what I see. I see the Batman sign in the sky. Commissioner Gordon is calling for Batman to help solve a crime. Now, that's pretty nice. You can't do that with any other program. But getting back to reality, you see this white in here. Okay, suppose I redraw the box, which you can do. That's what I'm going to show you. Okay, right here. And you can see the difference between the blue and the new box is just a little bit. But watch what happens when I click the blue button. See, I've got a little bit lighter because I cut out some of the white. If I went down here below the white, it would get a tad lighter. So you control everything by how much light you leave into your own grid square that you drew, or how much light you chop out of it. And you can have full control over that. So I'm going to close this up, and we'll have a few looks at these images we just did. Okay, give it a second to get set. Okay, let's have a look now and see what we got. I'm just going to hit the space bar and see what we came out with. I think that's a pretty interesting picture. It's got this odd shaped mobile, I guess you call it, sitting in the middle. We've got boats in the background. You can read the words, Sarasota, Florida over here. So that's a pretty nice sharp image, and you can give the credit to Qimage Ultimate. Okay, let's take a look at our other one. Okay, there we are. That's an interesting picture. We've got a crane in the back, and buildings, and boats, and Batman, and we did that by drawing our own grid square. Okay, let's move on and we'll tie this up. Okay, and just to wrap this up, I'll do one more with you. Just clicking on that same little shortcut button to get us into the refine screen for raw. Okay, there's our typical tourist who's saying, "Ma, I see a dolphin." Okay, now that's pretty common over here. Anyway, we're going to take this and we're going to draw our own little box like this. Okay, and we're going to say, okay, let's see what we can do to make her a little bit more interesting. So we click on the blue button, and there we are. Got a little bit more excitement into our picture. Perfectly exposed, everything's fine. But just for the sake of discussion, let's say you didn't care about these people. Here's your grandma, okay, right there. We draw a box around grandma, and we get grandma perfectly exposed. Now you can go ahead and crop out everything else and just do a cameo of grandma, and she's very, very happy. So you see, this is quite a tool to work with. That's all I wanted to show you is use your imagination, use the tool, have a wonderful time, and enjoy yourselves.
Thanks, Fred, for the excellent demo of the exposure controls in the refine window. Fred handled the exposure controls because, well, let's face it, he is Batman as far as the videos are concerned. So he handled the most diverse topic, which is the exposure control. So I guess I'll play Robin here, and I'll take on the easier stuff and go over some of the other controls here quickly just to show you what they are. The first thing I want to show you is that I selected an exposure grid up here that shows a brighter part of the image, but it's part of the sky that I was really interested in. I didn't want any of this blown out. So I selected that area of the sky, which darkened the image, and that forced me to increase the fill light up to a plus 13 here to get the foreground in the picture along with the sky. So you can see that the sky isn't blown out except for these sections here, which were so blown out that you weren't going to bring those back anyway. One thing that I want to show you is this HDR slider. Now you can do high dynamic range work within a single raw photo, and here's how you do it. The fill light has already been moved up to brighten the main subject of the image here. But if I want to bring back even more detail in these clouds up here, I can start sliding the HDR slider over to the right to help it bring back detail in the clouds as I move it. And I can watch and see when this starts to affect the foreground image, and I'll stop there. So I just keep on dragging, and I can go as far as I want and get any kind of look that I want to the image. And now I see that it's starting to lighten the buildings and some of the white parts of the ships at the same time. So I'll just drag it to some place that looks nice and stop there. So now you can see that it brought back a lot more detail in the sky by dragging this HDR slider up. If I move it back to the left real quick and you watch the sky, you can see what it did. See, it brings back the detail in the sky, and you can just stop where the sky or the brighter parts of the image meet the darker parts, and you can get an HDR look by doing that. As Fred already mentioned, you don't always want to select the brightest part of the image and use a lot of fill light, because that can affect the contrast of the more subtle tones in the image. So it's under your control. If the sky is interesting to you and you want to focus on that, you can use fill light and HDR to handle that, or you can just do as Fred did and select the area of concern and have it exposed just for that area. Another important tool is the white balance tool. And the white balance tool is this button right here. If you click on this dropper and then you move around the image, you can click on a spot that should be white or gray, and it'll reset the white balance to that point. So let's go up here into the clouds here, and I think these puffs here should probably be gray. So I'll click the dropper right here and we'll see what that does to the image. So as you can see, it gives you a whole different look to the image. So that's the white balance tool, and you can use that. Click on a gray spot in the image and rebalance your image. Another feature that's under your control here is the Smart Color Boost. And the Smart Color, this checkbox right here, is used to enhance colors in the photo by bringing out the saturation or the color so that it's more noticeable in the photo. I tend to leave this checked by default, and that's available in your raw options in the edit menu up here. But I leave this checked because it tends to enhance foliage and other things without affecting more subtle tones like skin tones. I'll show you what it does. If you turn it off, you can see that if you watch the color, the blue stripe on this building right here, when I turn it back on, you can see that the blue gets a little bit more blue, and the blues on the boats here get a little bit more vibrant. So it just brings out color so that it's more noticeable without shifting the hue or making it look strange. So that's what the Smart Color checkbox does. The final thing that I want to show you here is this area over here under the ISO. You can see that the ISO speed of this shot is 400. But what does this mean? Pushed to 1210. Well, what that means is, based on the exposure that you've chosen, this would be the equivalent of an ISO 1210 shot. So you're actually pushing the image a little bit by increasing the exposure, and in this case it's mostly done by the fill light. Let's turn off this HDR, and if I right click here to reset the fill light, it goes to 0, and you'll see now it's only pushed to 410. It's basically the ISO that the camera shot. But the more you do to it to brighten the exposure, the more you're effectively pushing this, which I tend to call the relative ISO speed. So if I go to my exposure here and I select, let's say, just these boats and expose for that, you can watch this push to number here jump up. It's jumped up to 2070 now, which means you've brightened the exposure so much that it's the equivalent of having taken the shot with everything else being equal at about 2000 ISO. The more you push it, you might notice that noise reduction has turned on. All that's handled automatically, and again, that's in the raw options. If I turn up the fill light here, we're going to get an image that looks terrible, but that's just because I'm going to show you what this does. I mean, this ISO will go way up here. And if the effective or relative ISO number here gets high enough, eventually you'll get into a region where the chroma noise filter will come on. And again, that's all handled automatically. So that's just an area to look here. If your image looks extra noisy and you only shot it at an ISO 400, well, maybe you underexposed it. Maybe you exposed for the sky and now you are redoing the exposure for the foreground, and that required a lot of positive EV or exposure compensation. So that's a number here to be familiar with. So hopefully this short explanation has gone through some of the other controls here and what they do. The only other one that I didn't go over is this white balance. And once you've clicked on the spot that you want to balance the image on a gray area, or even if you haven't, let's right click on this to remove the white balance that I clicked on. And here's what the camera picked. You can go a little bit cooler by dragging to the right, a little bit cooler on the white balance, or you can even go warmer, which in this case is too much because it was already a little bit warm. But you can see how that works as well. All of these controls are reset by a right click on the control, and that'll set it back to 0. Even the exposure, right click on that and then you can choose no grid selection, and it'll take your selection off and give it back to you the way Qimage would have normally developed it. So hopefully these tips will help you in using this refined screen, and thanks for watching.